You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Katie Mleziva, food brand strategist and host of the Real Food Brands Marketing Podcast. With 20 years of experience in brand and marketing strategy across a range of brands from Fortune 500 companies to local startups, Katie is driven to helping emerging natural food businesses and farms position themselves to stand out so they can go from making a good product to building a strong brand. Katie and I are discussing the importance of creating a clear vision for your business, sharing some key considerations to help you get clear on your vision, your purpose, and your values, and how to bring it all together as part of a successful financial and brand strategy. Let's get to it. Hey, Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you today because number one, you and I are friends and we've known each other for a couple of years now. So it's always lovely to spend time with you, but especially because over the last 12 months, I've referred a number of my clients and program members to you and your resources because they're not clear on why their business exists and who they're serving and how they want to grow. So often, I see business owners who feel like, well, I've got to sell through a distributor because I've got a CPG brand and I've got to sell through retail. And it just isn't in their heart and it isn't really what they want. And so the ability to dig deep with them and to really figure that out so that they can grow a business on their own terms, I think is wonderful. And I think that you do such an amazing job helping brands to do that. So my goal, and I know our goal for this conversation today, is to hopefully inspire the listeners out there that maybe are building a business the way they think they should be or have to, rather than the way that they really want to. And hopefully we can inspire them to kind of do the work of figuring out what they want and then taking the steps toward doing that.
Yes. Oh, that was all so good. I'm happy to be here to talk through that because I think there's so much out there in terms of I should do this. I mean, I even feel this in my business sometimes that you think I should be doing it this way. And there are best practices for a reason, and you can reference those, but also this work is so foundational to building a business that you're really happy with and really love. We know it's a tough business, so it better be aligned with what you really want to do every day when you wake up. So happy to be talking about it.
Yeah. Before we dive into the conversation, can you tell our listeners who might not be familiar with Real Food Brands and the work that you do, can you give a little overview about your business and kind of the services that you provide?
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is one reason why you and I get along so well is because we both are so passionate about helping more people get access to real food. And so that is really my motivation for what I do every day. But I also love working with food and beverage business owners because I started in big CPG, working at American Girl and Kraft Foods, and then left CPG for a little while to run a product line at an insurance company. And so I've had those big corporate experiences, but what it really put the spotlight on is that entrepreneurial spirit. I come from an entrepreneurial family, and it just really made me think like, this is where my heart is. And I feel like this is, even though we need the big companies to make change also, like this is where I feel like I can make the biggest impact because those big companies have access to big agencies and big budgets to make that happen. And so it's the more emerging brands who might not have the expertise or access to those experts that I want to make sure get the access to these brand strategy concepts because they do really make such a difference in terms of the clarity of your messaging and the story that you're inviting people into and how you position your brand to stand out. And then aligning everything that you do around that brand, it really serves as your North Star. So, and everything, including your financials. So yeah, so that's the work I do. Some of it's one-on-one, some of it's small group programs, some of it's an on-demand options. Just like I want people to have access to real food, I want food business owners to have access to this information so that they can understand those foundational pieces that you talked about when we first started the conversation.
Yeah. And I think, I say this almost at the start of every podcast episode. I want to ensure that all of our listeners are sort of on the same page. I don't want to use any verbiage or jargon that like maybe people won't understand. And so I feel like as we approach this conversation, just keeping it really simple, but then also kind of like connecting it to the brand strategy concepts and things that you teach normally, so we can, people like me who are totally numbers focused, right? Or maybe who haven't really thought about brand strategy before can start to connect the dots. I think is going to be super exciting, both for me and I
Perfect.
think for the listeners as well. So it's a very important part of both of our businesses that we help real food brands grow, as you mentioned, access to real food. And we both believe that we can create real change in the food industry, right? And in the lives of the business owners that we work with, which is super exciting. But I think, and you touched on this a little bit as well, I think that, we look to the past, we look to other businesses who have been successful and how they've done it. And for many CPG brands, but also caterers and meal delivery businesses, right? We've seen how others have been successful, and we feel like sometimes, well, that's the way it has to be done. And there are some brands I'm working with now that tried the retail route in CPG, and they're like, oof, that is not for me, not cut out for it. And they've decided to do, B2B wholesale, right? So they're making their delicious product to be sold by another company or to be used in another company's ingredient. And I think I want to talk about like, what things should people be thinking about when they're thinking about what kind of business they want to build? Can you share some thoughts and like I said, kind of connect those to any brand strategies or concepts that you normally teach?
Yes. So there's a couple different things that we can think through here. And then, so we'll talk about a few things, but then I'll talk about the vision, purpose, and values, which is tying it to the brand strategy concepts. But
Love it.
The first couple of just more basic questions, but not easy. That statement, simple is not always easy. So the simple question is, what role do you want the brand to play in your life? Mm-hmm. And that sounds so simple. But if you think about the role now and the role in the future, and those don't always align. I work with a lot of brands where it might play a role now where it's more of a hobby or a side gig. They think it might turn into their full-time job. And then there's other people who need a full-time job out of it. And then, beyond that, a full-time, like a larger company where they want to employ many, many people. So there is a large continuum, as you know, and what you want today might not be what you want a year or 5 years from now. But it's back to what you said earlier that's so important of aligning it to the role that it plays in your life. And then you're the expert on this part, but that idea of making sure that the role you want it to play in your life aligns with the financial role that you want it to play in your life. Because if it's, a hobby kind of setup in your life and you want it to be your full-time kind of salary, you've got to bridge from how you're going to get there from, hobby to side gig to your sole focus, or whatever that path looks like for each of you. So that's that idea of what role does it play in your life in terms of your time commitment, and then what role does it play in your life in terms of what sort of financial contribution you're able to make from it, or to take from it. Is it okay if you don't make money for years? Are you looking to make some fun money? Are you just supplementing you or your family's income? Are you looking to be the primary source of income for your household? That range of different options. And I'm guessing, is that something that you talk with people when you're working with them?
Yeah. Over time, we've started to put together a questionnaire of things that are important to know when we're embarking on creating a financial plan or strategy for a business. And one of the big questions is, you start with like, what is the vision for your business? And some people are like, I don't know exactly. And it's like, okay, it's fair that, so many people start their food business because they make something that's really delicious, and it's like a gift they give to their friends and their family. And then they get encouragement, right? And it starts to grow. And I was talking to someone the other day, they were like, all of a sudden, Sarah, I had this business and, I decided that I was going to take it seriously, but I still didn't know what the future of the business would look like, right? So we asked that question, but we of course ask, is it a priority to pay yourself from the business? And if it is, like, on what level? We've got a lot of people in our community who have full-time jobs and are running the business on the side, and their goal is to leave that full-time job and pay themselves fully from the business. That's so important to know, so we can structure, your finances in a way that helps facilitate that while supporting the rest of the business as well. So yeah, it's super important both for obviously the business owner to be clear on what they want the financials of the business to do for them, but then also me and my team so that we can help them to get there.
Those sort of simple but not easy questions to answer, when we tie that to brand strategy concepts, that's where at the very beginning of the brand strategy work, I like to say know thyself. So we get these things down on paper because we also look to the external world with competitors and what your consumer needs are, but we really want to start with your purpose, vision, and values when we're talking about brand strategy, so that we're looking inward first. So I said that kind of quickly. I'll just go through each one to explain what we're talking about. So for purpose, it's really that why are you doing this in the first place, and what's that motivating force? For some people, it's because there was an illness for themselves or someone in their family, or maybe a food allergy, or maybe it's that they purchased the company and they don't really have a big emotional attachment to it, but it was a good opportunity and they jumped on it. And so there's just so many different reasons that people have businesses in general, and especially in the food industry. And so that's the first question, the why, that vision, the purpose. Why are you in this business? The second one is your vision and where you're going with the business. So, you mentioned local versus regional versus national when you first started talking about these different decisions that people need to make in their business. And I'm sure you could rattle off a bunch of them also, the idea of value versus premium, or direct to consumer versus retail. You mentioned both of those decisions already. I mean, and other alternative channels too. There's so many different ways, and having a multi-channel experience too. There's so many different paths to sale these days. Even things, I don't know how you include this in your financial planning, but your vision of where you're going. Do you plan to keep this business till your last day? Do you plan to gift it to your children or someone else if you have, whatever your situation is? Do you plan to sell it? Like, you want max dollar the first day you could sell it. All of those things are viable options. It's just what fits your goals.
Yeah. So. And just to sort of echo what you're saying, and all of that, I'm sure it affects the brand strategy, obviously, and it's absolutely going to affect the financial strategy. If you are trying to sell for top dollar in 3 or 5 years, that strategy looks really different than growing, a regional brand that your children will take over one day, or, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's important to know so that you can proceed appropriately.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Even things like, how much are you as the founder going to be central to the story that you want to tell? Things like that, as you think about that idea of keep, sell, or pass on to the next generation, those are all discussions that do impact the brand strategy. And then things that are not quite as like this or this sort of decisions. There's also, with your vision, talking about things like what transformation you want to have. Is there an injustice in the world that you're looking to solve, or is there a gap in the market that you're looking to fill? Those are the kinds of things that when you're thinking about your vision that, you can also include. So some people like to write really short, concise vision statements, and that's good. Some people like to, bullet it out a little bit more, and I think that that's okay too, as long as you are able to put words to paper about where you're going. So you've got your purpose is the why, and then your vision is the where you're going, and then your values, the third one, is how you'll get there. So not in a tactical way, but how you'll get there in terms of how you and or your team show up on a daily basis. And so that is, one tip I like to give here is when you're talking about values is thinking about them in a very actionable, action-oriented way, because you're living these values to help get to your vision and achieve your purpose. So saying the words, some people like to use verbs, but saying what that word is, some people stop right there. They'll list the words, those look like great values. Good, we got our values done. But I always like to recommend that people write out examples, maybe 4 or 5 examples of what does that look like. So when you're talking, holding yourself to a standard, you probably don't have to give yourself examples. But when you are also thinking about the model that you're setting for your team, and then being able to very clearly say to people that this is the standards that we're setting in terms of our values. Either you agree with these and aligned and we're on the same page, or we're gonna have a conversation about if you're the right fit for the business long term.
Yeah. This is so helpful, and it's really getting to that sort of a core piece, I suppose, of the brand strategy, and thinking about both what do you want internally and also how does that translate externally is super helpful. Hopefully, I imagine it's helpful for everyone listening. There was some aha moments in my mind for me. And I think presenting it that way, that the internal and the external, I really like that. When we're talking about the vision and the where we're going, I wonder if you'd be open to doing a little bit of an exercise with me. I'm putting you on the spot here. We've talked about a couple, right? Like local versus regional versus national. Do you think that we could maybe talk through a few and talk about, how choosing one versus the other maybe would affect the strategy? And I can do the same for the financial part. I think maybe that will help people not only maybe have an aha moment to say, oh, I'd never thought about growing my business that way or being that kind of business, but then also if I want to be that kind of a business or I want to grow this way, then here's how I might think about doing it. So let's kick things off. I'm so glad you're game. So let's say that part of the vision, we're deciding, do we want to be local? Do we want to be regional, or do we want to be national? How can we think about those three differently in terms of the brand strategy?
Yeah. So one thing that it ties first a little bit, I'll just reference quickly the framework that I use for brand strategy. So it's first we define or refine the brand strategy. That's all about documenting. Some of it may be things that you've already talked about or thought about, but it's pulling it out of your head and synthesizing all of those thoughts and connecting the dots and putting it into the strategy. So that's the defining part and setting that North Star. And then we align everything on the front and back end of your business for that. So that could be the operations things, that could be the financials, that could be the marketing, it's everything. And then activate. So what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to really have that brand strategy run through everything that we do so that everything, literally everything, is working towards that goal. So I share that because as we're thinking about things in terms of the strategy as well as the tactical execution, literally everything could be impacted by that decision. So for example, when you're thinking about if you knew you wanted to stay a local brand, yes, you could include some national competitors in your competitive listing because those competitors are, the reality is that they are everywhere. So you are including them in the analysis because that is what some of your consumers will be looking at, or that's what they'll see on the store shelves. However, you may decide that you want to go a little bit deeper with the other local brands because those are if other people are looking for local, let's say, it's all so intertwined. Let's say that you have an ideal consumer that really values local. And so then you may be doing a competitive analysis where you go deeper on the local brands than you might on the national brands. If you are going to be a national brand, you are going to be looking at a competitive set that is really all of the big heavy hitters or maybe some of the more emerging brands. You could still look at those local brands for inspiration and to see what they're doing, just because, again, they are in the market on a local basis, but you're playing in a different field when you're looking at a national strategy. So that's one, the competitive analysis. The other thing I would say, this is one example, is that people vary in regions of the country or the world. So if you were going to be global versus, just West Coast, just East Coast, just Midwest, it really does impact the type of person and the other things that they're seeing on the shelf and maybe the experiences that they have, or when we think about other brands that people buy, they're, not just with online shopping, people can have access to almost anything these days. But when we think about what they're seeing in store, for example, or what they may be seeing more often, that can change on a regional basis. So the things that they do for fun, people might be hiking or surfing out west more than you can surf in Wisconsin actually, but it's a little different than by you. So, so it's really, it can impact literally every step of the way. It might not impact your company's capabilities. So that's one place that I would say it doesn't impact as much necessarily. Like if you are, have a specific professional expertise that really sets you up to be an expert in the field that you are working in, that is the same. Whether you are local, you're the subject matter expert, or regional or national, you still have that credibility. Or maybe you created this special process. That's still the same no matter where you're or what level you're working on. But some of those other pieces are really impacted depending on what those goals are. And if you don't know, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this from the financial perspective. But I would also say, like, if you don't know, you can start with that strong foundation of knowing what you want your brand to be, and it's all about a hypothesis, and you test and you learn and you grow and you change things as needed. And so you may say, I want to be a national brand. I work with people who say I want to be a national brand, and they get a few years in and they're like, actually, I've seen that, and that's not what I want. And I am happy being where I am, and I live a comfortable life, and I don't want to do what it takes to get to that next step. And I think that that's okay too. So
totally.
So how about from a financial perspective?
Yeah. So a number of things are affected financially in terms of like where you want to be selling, right? And if you want to be local or regional or national. And one of the things that pops right into my head is whether or not you are going to need distribution and what those distribution relationships will be like for a CPG brand in particular, right? If you're local, you can probably sell direct to your consumer. And if you're going to sell through retail, you can sell direct to those retail stores. So your margins look different. The price that your customers are going to be paying you looks quite different than if you're growing nationally, let's say, where you've got to work with not just one distributor, but several distributors. And, some of them, depending on what stores you want to get into, which we might talk about in another in a minute, they're going to want lowest guaranteed price for your product, right? Or what have you. If they're distributing your product, across regions, there may be some freight fees that are involved. There's like a lot that goes into distributing your product on a larger scale that just simply doesn't go into a local brand. And we've got it. We always take that into consideration. Even if you are not sure if you want to be national or not, we generally will look at your costs and your pricing structure to ensure that if you decide to, things will work out, and we've structured the business in a way that you can be successful. It's interesting on a regional level because you have options, right? So we have a shared client, actually, a fermented food and beverage brand who is selling regionally, and I just adore the way that she has approached it. She's found partners in distributors. They're not taking a huge margin from her. She's growing methodically and with purpose, and so there are distributors involved, but she's got a bit more control over that relationship. She's got a bit more control over the margins. It just looks very different than when you're doing it on a national basis. Now, of course, we're still looking at her cost structure and her pricing structure to make sure that everything is sound. And if and when they move beyond the region, things are going to be positive for her. So that's one really big one. We also then, if you are selling nationally, do you need brokers? Do you need a sales team, right? These are all expenses that you may not need as a local brand. You may not even need them as a regional brand. So the larger financial model and outlook for your business just generally will look different. And it's good to plan for those things as early as possible so that you are prepared for them. And so what your growth targets look like. And I'll use this as the last example. If you're a local brand, for example, you may have max capacity for sales essentially, right? Like imagine if you have just 2 SKUs, there's this many stores you can sell to, there's this many farmers markets in your, local area, whatever you presume to be local for your business. So what does that mean in terms of how much you need to charge for your product in order to pay yourself the salary that you want to from your business, right? Or in order to support yourself the way that you want to? And does that align with how much you have to work and how many farmers markets you need to do, right? So it all plays a part in that way. I want to talk about value versus premium brand, because I'm going to share another shared client that we have. The reason I sent them to you was because one week we had a meeting and we were talking about them as a premium brand. And the next week we got together and they were like, I think we need to be volume focused. I read this article about, another business owner who sold a similar product. And I was like, we can go no further. You must talk to Katie and get really clear on who you're serving, where you want to sell your product, how you want to grow your business, so that we can get clear on this. Because you can, like you said, you can test, you can hypothesize, you can change your mind, but you can only bounce back and forth for so long, right? You have to make a decision ultimately. So tell us, important things maybe to consider when thinking about value versus premium and how that might affect your brand strategy.
Sure. I think, what I always like to think about it from, you're sort of triangulating, and maybe it's more coming at it from 2 angles is the better way to say it. Again, what is your vision? And you kind of have an idea for the sense of your brand. If you're looking for that more premium high-end brand, because that's the kind of brand you want to build. But there's also the reality of the financials. And again, you can speak to that more. But if you have COGS of $10 per item, you're not going to have a value brand. It's just sort of the reality of it. So there's the reality side of it, and there's that vision side of it. But I work with a really, really great brand in Scotland, actually, who is sort of positioned in, I don't want to say the middle, because that makes it sound like they're trying to achieve both, but in a way they are. So they produce all of their own items, and they have basically kind of cut out the middleman. So they're all direct to consumer. They're all about getting more people access to real food also. And so they are able to provide a really high quality product at a value price. And that is a nut that they have cracked. No pun intended, because they do sell a lot of nuts. But I think that's a little bit rare, that you can have a really high quality product and a value price. Most people need to figure out where they're going to position themselves. And this is something that has been on my mind that I really want to work to change. And I think, Sarah, that you probably do too, that unfortunately it feels like a lot of the times when we're talking about real food and good food is that it's got to be that premium kind of pricing and branding approach that then leaves a lot of people out of the conversation. And I know that that's not our focus on the conversation of our podcast today, but that is something that has just really been on my mind and my heart, that how as an industry can we do better in terms of high quality, great real food, but at the value price. So more of what this company in Scotland is doing, how can we do more of it here in the US too?
I think that you touched on very briefly, but something that I want to highlight is that they've got a high quality product. They're able to offer it at a price point that's approachable to more people. I'm going to say because they're going direct to consumer, right? Because if you add that middleman, it becomes a lot more difficult. And sometimes there's, you're paying kind of 2 people, right? The distributor's taking a bit, then the retailer's taking a bit. Whereas if you're selling direct to the consumer, the price point can be lower to that end user. And it goes back to what we said in the beginning. I believe, and I think you believe this as well, is you can build a business on your own terms. There's a food truck I work with in Maine, and they want to use the best, ingredients that are local. They use tortillas that are made in Vermont. The animal proteins that they utilize are all from farms with the highest standards, right? And it would have been real easy for us to say, well, you got to charge $14 a plate. And they're like, well, or however much a plate, like no one can afford that, right? So they were very conscious of it from the beginning. And so they've got a model that's a food truck, right? So their operating costs are fixed. They can work with that. They can, have relationships with different people. They're able to create a business in a way that meets their goals and objectives and also allows them to feed more people than if they had to sell that really high product. And I think at the end of the day, that's exactly what we are trying to achieve in this conversation and in our work is like, think creatively about what you want, but get clear on why, right? Get clear on the purpose and the vision and the values. And I think if you keep coming back to that, these questions we're asking, local versus regional versus national, premium versus value, or somewhere in the middle. Why can't somewhere in the middle be a good thing? Right?
As long as you're positioned in a way that people understand what you stand for and the story that you're inviting them into. Totally. Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I really like what you said about the food truck, because the work that we each do, if that food truck knows, again, back to that North Star, that they know what they stand for, and then they see the reality of the financials when they're working with you, are they going to go buy, straight up cheap ingredients? No. But maybe if there's that continuum where today they have to make this decision and tomorrow they're hoping to get to this decision, but it's still better than that, mass consumption kind of option, that it's all, I really do think things are not always black and white. And there's this continuum that we can work on where we're always trying to get, incrementally better. And having that North Star in place, and this is why I send people to you, is because once they have that data points and the financial clarity, then they can make those decisions or see that, like, I'm on a crash course. Yes, my vision is big and I want to make all these, perfect decisions according to what my values are and what I think will set me apart. But, I'll be in business for 2 weeks because it's just not financially sustainable. So I do think that that's why what you do is so important too, because they can take what their position is, and then they can know, okay, well, I can focus on the, sort of like dials, I think. Like I can dial up and down these different ingredients for now, and then we can keep revisiting it.
Yeah. Likewise, I've got, some folks that I work with who on paper, and I say this all the time, my job is to show you the reality of the numbers of your business, right? So based on what we're doing now and the information we have available to us, this is the financial reality of your business. And sometimes they think that they're a value brand and the finances says you're not a value brand, and they're like deer in headlights. And I'm like, I can't help you, transition, but in order to be a successful premium brand, you need a good resource. You need someone who can help you understand how to position yourself that way, but also make sure that it aligns with your purpose, your vision, and your values. And there are going to be times where businesses don't continue, they don't move forward because that alignment is hard to find. And I also, this is so common to say, I want to normalize, I sound so Instagram right now, but I'm going to say it. I want to normalize businesses ending, because you don't always know what the future looks like, right? It's exciting to start something new. It's exciting to try to accomplish a goal, and it doesn't always work out. And, that's okay.
Yes, I think that's a great point. You made an impact while you were in business, either to the people who bought or to the suppliers you purchased from or to the farmers markets you were at, if if that's where you were selling or whatever that is, your business did something. Yeah. That's a really good point. I like that.
So some other things that business owners might want to think through, in this vein are, do I want to be a solopreneur or do I want to grow a team? Do I want to keep my company, sell my company in a few years? Do I want to pass it off to the next generation, right? Once you've thought through all of these things and what your vision for your business is, you're clear on your purpose and you've got your values, you've essentially determined this is how I want to grow my business and my brand. How does a business owner take that information and implement it? And how do we move forward toward, a successful brand and a successful business from your point of view?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Sarah. So I think what's really easy to have happen is that you think about these things and then you put them on a shelf and then you go back to your daily tactics and then you just keep doing what you should be doing.
Yeah.
So, and if you can't see me on the video, I've got air quotes, what you should be doing. So the really important thing is that this is not a strategy that will just sit on the shelf. And so we want it to be a constant guide so that, yes, again, you're looking at best practices, but you're not just looking at what everyone else is doing, because you don't know what's going on behind closed doors of their businesses. When it comes to the MSRP of what they're selling at shelf, for example, when, speaking in your world, you don't know if that's viable or not. You don't know if they're positioning, thinking about my world, you don't know if their positioning is working or not. So we want to do it on your terms. And so when you've got that purpose, vision, and values, then we look at the external inputs. So we do look at the competitive set and we say, okay, what's going on in the landscape today? And that is never ever to try to copy or wish that we were like someone else. It's purely to get data points to know what is out in the market. And that's because we want to be able to position you differently than the consumers, or to consumers. We want to make sure that buyers know that you know your category. And if you are interested in investment, we want to make sure that investors know that you've done your homework. So that is why some people will say, I just want to put blinders on. I don't care what the competitors are doing. I just want to run my race. And I completely respect that thought. But it is, for the reasons I listed, it is important, because I will tell you, I've worked with a lot of people with, very smart people who say this is how they're going to position their brand. But then once they start to do the competitive work, or once we start to do it together, they see that there's a lot of people saying the same thing. So once we start to lay out what the competitors are saying in terms of their key messages, we can really see where the white spaces are, and we can see what everybody's saying. And I always say, if everybody's saying that, that doesn't mean that you can't say it too. It just can't be what you differentiate yourself on. And then if nobody's saying it, you have to think about, is that because it's a terrible idea, or because just nobody has that perfect intersection of knowledge and capabilities that you have. So that's the competitive side of things. So that is, again, looking externally. And then we look towards the consumers. And who do we think is that ideal consumer? And this can take some testing and learning as well. And by testing, if you've got the means to do market research, that can be really helpful. But we can do some more directional assumption making and looking at third-party data and research reports and things like that to fill in the gaps of what your assumptions or knowledge already is about your existing audience. So again, we're looking, documenting. We always want to document all of this because we think we'll remember it in our heads, but going through this systematic process, it's really important to get it all on paper. So we're documenting who our ideal consumer is. We're looking, sometimes, again, if you're a regional brand, the demographics of the geography, that matters. If you're not a regional brand, and even just, that example aside, I really am focusing more and more on psychographics, because those are those beliefs or behaviors. And, that can really span age, for example. It can span race. It can span religious beliefs, or a number of kids in the household, or all those things that as marketers we used to really love. Those beliefs and behaviors can be better indicators of who will, or what type of person will actually buy your product. And then, the ads you serve up or the content that you serve might be a little bit different depending on, age. But what we're trying to do is look for that overlap, that where everyone has commonalities within those ideal consumer types. So we've got our vision, or our purpose, vision, and values, and we look externally to our consumers or competitors. We look externally to our consumers, and then we look back to yourself, back to your brand, and you look at those competitive advantages and capabilities, and you say, okay, what can I really offer these consumers in a way that my competitors either can't or won't, now that I have all of this documented? And so that's why you can see, hopefully, why it's a linear process. So we go through this in very specific order, and then you can always go back and tie the different pieces together. But we go through it, and it all builds on each other step by step. So by the end, then you've got things defined like your brand personality and your brand pillars and your brand positioning And I know that these are all terms like you were talking about earlier that might be like, well, what are each of those things? So I'm happy to describe that if you want. But what it is it's those outputs. So we've been talking most of the time about the inputs. These are then the outputs that are going to be your guide of how you want to build your business going forward. So the foundational pieces of what your brand stands for and how you'll position it to stand out in the market, and what's that story that you're going to tell based on all this other work that you've done. So it's really the pieces that are going to be the common thread that weaves through everything that you do, so that when people hear your brand name and see your products and see the price point and they're not shocked by it because they see the value, then it just all fits together, and you're consistent and you're cohesive, and you just have clarity about how you're going to make it all happen, and you're excited to invite other people into the story with you.
Oh, thank you so much for that. It just the connection, sort of from start to finish, I feel like is what we have, right? Starting with that purpose, that vision, and your values, that internal inside of you thing that is almost like, also a North Star, right? You're in a sense, like, who do I want to be, right? Like, outside of this podcast a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about a brand. I won't mention the name, honestly, because I can't remember it, but you had indicated, great product. I think it was a husband and wife team, and they had perhaps grown a brand that looked successful from the outside and walked away because the result was a life that they didn't want to be leading, right? It was just
totally
off base for what they wanted from their day to day. And not to say that like, oh, if they did this work, the outcome wouldn't have been the same. You might dream something that's not the right dream for you. That also happens, right? Then that's part of life and living and growing. But getting clear, I think, on this work, both from you first, what do I want? What do I dream of? What is my vision for me and a business? And then what can I do to, from a financial perspective and from that brand perspective, to set myself up to be as successful as possible, to pull all the pieces together to make that a reality. It just makes me really happy and excited, for brands who maybe are just starting out, or who've, we work with some brands that have been in business 3, 4, 5 years, and they're just kind of doing it, right? And they've reached the point where they're like, all right, we're going to get real serious about this, and I'm going to get real clear on how I want to grow. And that's the point in time when they do this work, and that's okay too, right? So, because you said define or refine. So it doesn't mean this has to be done on day one. You might, figure it out a little bit a few years into it if you didn't take it seriously before, or it was a hobby for a while and now you want it to be your sole income, right? I just so appreciate having you as a friend, but inside the industry as someone that I can count on to provide great support, guidance, and help around brand strategy, because it's kind of easy for me to look at the numbers and say, these are the facts, and with this, you should go talk to Katie to help you figure out how to make these facts, a reality in terms of the brand and stuff. And I think, we've talked about this on previous podcasts we've done together. It's not just a focus on financials or a focus on brand strategy. It has to work together. It's so important to work together.
Oh, 100%. Yes. And I feel the same way. We enjoy talking, but we do have different areas of expertise. And so I appreciate that you can translate those numbers and help people, know how to bring their brand vision to life too, by sort of translating. I feel like you speak a language of food finance that not everybody speaks. Yeah. And so it's so good.
Thank you. So I know that you've got a couple different ways that folks can work with you. You've got one-on-one,
yes,
right, consulting, but then you've also got some other options. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So quarterly, I teach a live small group class, and I love that. It's a 3-day intensive, and so you get the opportunity to work with other food business owners. And that's actually where I met the client that you mentioned first in the podcast that's doing some really cool things in terms of distribution. And so it's a great opportunity to work on your own work on your own work and a little bit of one-on-one time with me to check in, but then also get that peer interaction and feedback, which is something I love facilitating. So there's that. And then also by the time this launches, will hopefully be live with my on-demand option, because where we started the conversation, so we're coming full circle here, is that I really want this information to be accessible to, hopefully every brand. So in on-demand option, it's you get the information and you can work through it based on videos and in a small group and some calls and things. So there's a little bit of support there, but it's mostly self-driven. But that also helps keep the price affordable. So there's different ways that I work with people, and I love all of them, really. How do you choose your favorite, right?
And of course, Real Food Brands podcast. Can you tell folks where to find you and how often you release new episodes?
Yes. So good point. That is a totally free option. I share a ton of content on the podcast. You could really piece all of this together, and I guess outside of having the workbook that I have as part of my programs, you could do a lot of this work. So that's the Real Food Brands Marketing Podcast, and it's on all the different places that you can find podcasts. And you can also go to my website, realfoodbrands.com, to listen to episodes and to get all my social links too. But I'm Real Food Brands everywhere. So if you look up Real Food Brands on any social platform, but Instagram is where I hang out most often.
I love it. So it's at Real Food Brand?
It's at Real Food Brands.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, yeah. I want to say that if you are a food or beverage business owner who's listening to this podcast, I don't know if you had an aha moment, or if you thought to yourself at any point during the time we were talking, you know what? I can follow my heart a little bit more in my business, or I can do this on my own terms. We would love it if you would tag us in a post or share with us at Real Food Brands, and I'm at sarah.delavan.consulting. I know Katie and I are so happy that you joined us today and that you tuned in. I'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Katie, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I would love to hear from everyone, like you said. Hopefully we inspired some new ideas, and talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.